Thank you so much for that introduction, Kim. And thank you both, Kim and Neil, for the invitation to moderate today's event. This topic is so important to me for the purposes of career services within law school, because oftentimes our students and graduates don't realize the opportunities for them in business that a JD skill set opens up. So I am Mary Walsh Fitzpatrick. I'm the Assistant Dean for the Career and Professional Development Center at Albany Law School, and I'm delighted to moderate today's panel. I'm going to start by inviting our panelists to introduce themselves. First, let me just introduce each one. Andy Gold is the Senior Vice President and Chief Human Resource Officer for Pitney Bowes. And Keita Young is the Senior Director for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at FanDuel. It is a pleasure to be with you both this afternoon. Andy, do you want to start us off by telling us a little bit about your background and what you do now?
Sure, Mary. Again, thank you everyone for having me and for joining us. I currently lead HR for Pitney Bowes. For those of you who don't know, Pitney Bowes not only does what you used to refer to as mail meters, but a lot of shipping work. We sort about 17 billion pieces of mail and then the post office to deliver. So if you're getting a bill or something like that, it probably came from us, as well as a statement for your brokerage accounts, all those kind of things, as well as we sort about 200 million plus packages. If you return something through the USPS, it probably comes through us. We sort it and then also get it back to the sellers that you're returning to. I started my law career at Columbia Law School. I graduated there way back in the 80s. Or actually, I graduated in the 90s. So I made it out of the 80s. I went to work at two law firms in New York City, doing labor and employment work generally, a little ERISA benefit work as well, and at the end, a little bit general litigation. I moved into a role as a labor and employee relations counsel at Pitney Bowes. I did that for about 7 years or so, and then ultimately moved into an HR director role, went back and forth a couple of years while we were figuring out where was the right place for me, and ultimately moved full-time into HR, originally leading a lot of our benefits work, and then ultimately have gone on to do pretty much every HR job you can do within a company. I've led talent acquisition, recruiting. I've led talent development, learning and development and training. I've led total rewards. How do we compensate people? How do we design our healthcare benefits? And I've been an HR business partner for our engineering group. How do you help them through all of their org decisions and everything else? And about a year and a half ago, I became the head of HR, leading all of those various functions. So that's kind of my journey. Thanks for asking, Mary.
Sure, that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that, Andy. And what really stands out to me is that you had a very deep, it sounds like a very deep knowledge of a certain practice area, being labor and employment, that then was probably, I'm imagining, very useful to you in your current role.
It was and is.
Yeah, so I'll be eager to hear more about that. Keita, welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Can you share a little bit about your background and how you landed the position you're in now?
Sure. So currently I am the head of diversity, equity, and inclusion at FanDuel, which is an online gaming company. I'm sure many of you who are into sports have seen our commercials and our platform and what we stand for. So I've been at FanDuel for about a year now, graduated from Penn Law in the 90s, and ended up practicing employment law, just like Andy, in Philadelphia, and then moved to another law firm and was doing employment law there. So I practiced law for roughly around 6 or 7 years. And my journey then pivoted a little bit. I ended up having a child, and interesting, thought I'd stay home for a year or two, but that year or two turned into 11 years. So I was a stay-at-home mom for 11 years, raising 3 children during that time. And while I was off, didn't completely remove myself from the outside working world. I owned a store called Duck Duck Goose, which was a children's consignment store. I also did a little bit of educational nonprofit work. And then when my daughter turned 2, I was itching to kind of get back into the formal working world. And I went to JP Morgan through their legal reentry program. So they had a program for those who had been out of the workforce. And I was one of the first participants in the legal program for the legal reentry program. And I, interesting, thought that I was going to be doing employment law there, but wasn't actually selected for that group. I was selected for another group called root cause analysis. And interesting enough, had no idea what that meant. Really had never worked in the financial world at all, but it was probably one of the best experiences for me because it was a new group that had been established. So there was a lot of exposure that I got, not being in the employment area, but in this new area. And I practiced law at JP Morgan for a couple of years, and then moved over into the HR department because I had a liking for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And an opportunity arose programming, managing a global diversity strategy, and I was tapped to do it. Did that for a couple of years, then came back to the legal department, but on the operational side, but still had my hand in diversity. And then this opportunity came a year ago for me to actually lead a group and a department around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's how I got to FanDuel.
Terrific. Thank you for that. And you've just piqued my curiosity. I can't help but ask this question. What is root cause? And what does a root cause analyst do?
Well, it's so funny. Root cause analysis. We looked at customer complaints to try to figure out whether there were any legal, reputational, or regulatory risks that we could assess based on the complaints that people were filing against the company. So it was essentially trying to get ahead of what could possibly be litigation by looking at the complaints that were being filed against the company. So it was actually something that I had never really experienced. So I was able to experience different areas of the bank, different areas of the law, try to come up with preventive solutions and processes for JP Morgan to avoid litigation that could happen in the future.
Well, it's interesting to hear you describe that in those terms, because it strikes me that the ability to do that, right, is indeed one of the skills that lawyers are really well known for, being able to analyze a situation and identify risk and perhaps mitigate risk where possible.
That's right.
What other unique skills do you think that lawyers and law graduates bring to non-lawyer roles that you've experienced?
Oh, a lot. I think our background in what you said, looking at problems, and I also feel like coming up with different ways to look at a situation. I think we learned that skill set in law school. You got to be able to argue both sides, right? You have to be able to look at something and seeing it from all different angles, which is, I think, a skill set that they teach us in law school that's effective really in everything that you do. And people are in every profession looking for solutions to problems and opportunities. So I think law school teaches you the ability to do that in a way that's concise, efficient, and really about trying to come up with the best solutions, but assessing it from all different angles.
I love that. What about you, Andy? How have your legal skills been valuable to you in your different roles in your career?
Well, I definitely agree with that ability to look at both sides. And the ability to listen, that skill of listening when you're getting the data that you need to make your decision. And I remember my law professors always said the answer was, it depends. That's the same answer in business. What are you trying to do? Are we trying to protect the corporation at all costs and cut down all risk? But then what happens with the clients? And so understanding your goals and listening to all the different stakeholders to help come up with a solution, I think is a skill you pick up throughout law school and as you practice, and it's definitely transfers over to the ability to be successful in a corporation.
One other thing I'd like to add to that, Andrew,
Please.
that was definitely right on point. Also, I think in law school, you learn how to argue both sides, right? So you know who your audience is. And I find that in the world, like where I am, you've got to be an influencer. You have to be able to bring people along on your journey and be able to present an argument that's favorable to them so they understand what you're talking about. You learn that in law school, how to be articulate, concise, but provide, information where people believe you and believe your argument and believe your thoughts around a particular issue. I think you learn that in law school.
Well, that is a great point, Kita. I love that. And working on that skill of becoming a persuasive speaker, right? And helping people to understand your point of view is definitely something that is learned in law school. Do you think that there is sort of a reputation that lawyers may have that maybe we're too risk averse? Is that a hurdle that lawyers having to move into the business space have to sort of address with business partners? Andy, you look like you want to take that
Well,
question.
because I've apologized for that when I made the switch. So as I said, I spent about 7 years being the labor and employment attorney, and then I went out to be director for what was our management services group. We managed mail rooms and fax rooms and things like that. And I got there, and 15 days later, it's a mailroom management company, we got the first anthrax letters. And they were all in my region. And for those who don't remember that time, the anthrax is a little white powder. It's in an envelope, and if you touch it, it could kill you. And there was at least one death. And so they were shutting down the offices. So if there was anthrax found in the mailroom, you shut down all that, wherever office it was in. We were in some large companies that did R&D, pharmaceutical companies, and shutting down an R&D facility would cost our clients tens of millions of dollars per week. So we needed to make sure we had a way. So I was trying to get double wide trailers and open mail in the parking lot, and our lawyers were trying to make sure that we never got blamed if somewhere anthrax got into the system later on. They had every right, and it was the right perspective from them. From a client perspective, it was not great because they wanted us out of the office and into the parking lot as soon as possible. So finding that right balance of risk. And since I've moved to HR, I've generally made my HR people work in a business, an HR role, just so they understand the client perspective. We get some of that. Of course, as practicing attorneys, you're getting the client perspective, but it's really important. Most of the time we get involved after something has happened if you're a practicing lawyer. In these other roles, you're trying to get ahead of things happening. And so making sure that you are balancing the risk of your clients who pay you and the risk to the company. And there's been a number of things, policies that we put in. You always put in a policy because something went wrong, but are we really understanding the impact of those policies? So it's a somewhat of a running joke, especially in those first few years, like who agreed to this thing? It's like, well, I wrote it. And understanding that impact to all your stakeholders, your employees, your clients, the company, even your communities. all becomes really important, and it forces you to think in a broader way. And the earlier that you can start doing that, the better.
That's
Yeah.
terrific. Thank you for that example. Kita, please.
I find in my field, at least in the companies that I've worked for, that I do think that lawyers are very risk adverse, but I love the fact that I am a lawyer, so I understand where they're coming from, and I'm always pushing back. Like, I understand the risk. I understand what you're talking about, but I do think that we need to push forward because I can do that same analysis that you are doing. I sat in your seat before. I understand where you're coming from, but I'm now here offering you a new perspective. So it's interesting. I find that the lawyers are very much like toeing the line, and this, and I'm like, I get it. Or when I'm with the business and they're talking about things that the lawyers are saying, I can kind of interpret for others who don't really understand why they are coming the way that they are. But I'm like, listen, from my legal background, my legal perspective, I understand where they're coming from, but we should also, push back on this. So it allows me, I think, my legal background to bring a value to the conversation that other people might not understand or clearly are really empathize with, another person's, a lawyer's position.
I love that. That's fantastic. Thank you, Kita. It sounds like you're really hitting upon that ability to sort of straddle the two worlds, right? And clearly communicate between the business operation and the legal operation. Are there any other skills that you think, from a business perspective, make lawyers uniquely qualified for these roles? And I have to apologize, there is a leaf blower right outside my window.
We can't hear it. We can't hear it. I would just add, by the nature of the role, lawyers are results oriented. And we tend to know what that desired result is. It comes generally from our clients: close this deal, resolve this litigation. We generally know that. Business is all results oriented. So having that ability to understand and measure what the results are that you're trying to achieve, and bringing that perspective in and focus on, that's where you start. You don't generally get to what result. You want to start at the results and work your way backwards, how you're going to achieve them. And I think that's generally what law does. And so bringing that focus in on how you get your results and shaping your conversations around, well, what results are we trying to get to? How are we going to measure success? And then working our way backwards, I think is something that does come out of the legal training.
I think, oh yeah.
I was going to add one more thing: attention to detail. I think we learn that very early on, can read things critically, get, information that others might miss. I find that's something that I attribute to my law school years, but I find in my role right now, just being very conscious of detail is something that I think lawyers bring, that might be unique to our profession.
That's terrific. And you know what I love about what both of you are saying is that it strikes me that there's also this wonderful opportunity working sort of on the business side of the house to both, be preventative, to get deals done, to find opportunity to create things that sometimes, when you're working as a lawyer and you're in that role of cleanup, let's say, and addressing issues that have already developed, that maybe isn't the right place for everybody, right? When you're practicing law and you're having to litigate an issue that's already happened, that's very different from being on the business side, where you can actually think about what you could do to prevent a situation from happening by creating good policy, or, having good protocol or procedure around issues. So I'm going to ask sort of a selfish question here, because I think that this is a question that many people in my position in career services are really curious about, which is, how do you recommend that people in my position who are advising students, advising recent graduates, who may want to enter spaces that are not traditional legal practice, how can we engage with companies to get them to consider law graduates, and in my case at Albany Law School, our master's students, for non-traditional legal jobs or law adjacent jobs? How do we make the case to companies to start really thinking about this talent pool for their business needs, whether it be around compliance, operations?
So I would say the more adjacencies you can demonstrate to what you were doing, the easier it is to move from law to something in a corporate world. So we both went in-house first. That's an easier move than making the big leap from being a lawyer, especially being a law firm lawyer, to something in business. But if you're going to do that, or even what we then did afterwards is move into other areas, they were somewhat adjacent to what we were currently doing. So if you are looking to move, what is the adjacency? What is the story? So if you focused on real estate, that's the story you want to tell about how you can use those skills to join a real estate firm. To go from a real estate firm to an entertainment firm may be harder, and you have to find what are those things that you've done. The caveat I would give, though, is don't do things you don't like. And don't do them at places, don't do things you like at places you don't like to be at. And so if you ultimately really decide, I've gone to law school and being an in-house or being a law firm lawyer is not for me, there's lots of other things you can do with that law degree that are very much adjacent. Anything in the compliance area. We have lawyers who are working for us who are doing safety work because it's tied into some of their other compliance and oversight work they did as lawyers. So looking for ways to do things you like. There's always government type roles that have a legal part to it. You need to understand all the laws that are applicable, but you may not actually be acting in a legal degree or a legal role. So I think find things that you see the adjacency towards, but also find things that you like doing. Because I've had one job that I liked the job, I didn't like the place, and it was not where I wanted to be. And I quickly left, and that's not a great mental health thing. It's not a great way to live your life.
It's interesting. I totally agree everything with what Andy says. Like, I am now doing diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm head of a department that is totally focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. When I was practicing law at JP Morgan, that wasn't my job, but I was involved with the legal diversity committee. I was, seeking out opportunities where I could further my passion, thing that I was interested in. So when the opportunity came for me to program manage the global diversity strategy, even though I was a lawyer, they could look on my resume to see that my passion and what I was doing was diversity. And that's how I got the job. Mary, I think your question was like, how do we convince employers? I don't know. You got to have a story. I agree with Andy. Like, whatever you do, you've got to have a story that's going to connect your career and what you're doing, what you want to do outside of the law with like your passion and interest or something like that. I do think, and I think people automatically assume because you went to law school, you're smart, or you've got some superpowers that other people don't. But I do think oftentimes employers might look at that, well, that's not their field. That's not what they've gone to school for. So
Right.
somehow you've got to weave in other things that employers look at, because I think the responsibility is going to be on the applicant who's applying. Why are they marketable to that particular field or area? And you have a law degree, right? And I think that's what people will look at. But I think that oftentimes, I don't think employers really understand the skill sets that lawyers bring to a job. And so somehow, as someone who's applying for a job, I've got to be able to articulate that and show that the benefit of my skill sets from the legal career are going to enhance this business in a way that you might not get with another candidate.
That is really helpful advice, Keita and Andy. Thank you.
And I would say, read the job description, right? Because I can't tell you how many people respond to a job description and their response has nothing to do with what we're actually looking for. Job description's got two parts. It's got what's the actual content that you should know, the knowledge you need to do this job or experience you need. And a lot of them are the softer skills, like how are you at managing? How are you at time planning? How are you at paying attention to the details? And you can use those things that Keita was talking about, but make sure you're actually responding to the job you're applying for, and building that story around the job description itself, not trying to convince somebody that they should hire you for this job without responding to what they're actually looking for. And, what are your response often should make sure you're ticking off at least the majority. You don't have to have every skill or every requirement or every experience, but you do have to respond to the job itself. And that will get you at least into the second round of review and not have the resume kicked out earlier on where, because it's just not responsive.
Thank you for that, Andy. So I see we have a few questions from the audience, and I want to make sure that we address those questions before we view Waleed's video. And this is for both of you, but I will start with Keita. Keita, do you have advice for how former attorneys, and I love the fact that this person says former, can position their time in the law during the interview process? How do they talk about that experience of having worked as an attorney when they're interviewing for a non-attorney position?
Yeah, I think you have to talk about skill sets. I agree with Andy. Look, you've got to figure out what skill sets you have that align with this particular job. Because what you're doing is trying to show how you are going to add value to a job or position that you're going to get. So you've got to understand, what are the critical skill sets that I've learned in my current position as a lawyer that can be transferable or enhance this job in a way where people are like, wow, I see the connection. I see how this person's going to add value. So I think it's you have to really hone in on what is needed for this position that you have, that you've learned, that you gained, that is transferable. It doesn't matter that you did it in the legal field, because I shouldn't say it doesn't matter. What you need to prove is that you were really successful in in your legal field by using these skill sets that are transferable in this new non-legal role. And you're going to be successful in this role too. So I think it's understanding what skill sets you have, presenting the fact that by using these skill sets, you were really successful in this role, legal role, and I can easily transfer those same skill sets into this non-legal role and be just as successful.
Yeah, it really is an education campaign, right?
Right.
It's
It
really
is.
approaching it from the perspective of, I know what I've developed, what I've learned, the competencies that I have, and now I'm going to tell you, interviewer or employer, how they fit with your needs.
Right. And it's a story you have to tell. Like it, when I was 11 years out of the workforce, like I was like, who is going to hire me? I mean, seriously, I really thought this. And then when I was interviewing at JP Morgan, I had a story. I was like, I took 11 years off and I opened up a business. I didn't have a business degree. I didn't have an MBA, but I did it. And I was a lawyer and I used my skills to like negotiate the lease. And I did all of this. And like and then like I said, I went to educational nonprofit because I could look at like contracts. And then I was like, and everything I did, I was successful. So if you bet on me, if you hire me, I will bring those same skill sets to this job and be successful. And it worked. I got the job. And then I got this job, same thing. I wasn't head of HR. I mean, head of DE&I. I was program manager and it was one of my work streams. But I had a story of like why everything in my past had set me up for this role. And I got the job. But it was this story that I told that convinced others the skill sets, the experience that I had gained positioned me right for this position. And I'm here and I'm being successful here. So it's how you present yourself.
It is, Keita, and your confidence just exudes through the screen. So it's part of that too, right? That you have to believe in yourself. And you did just sort of answer a question that was posed, but I'm just going to put it out there. Someone is asking that they're working with a law student who has been a mom and probably out of the professional workforce for many years. And I think you just answered the question, but what is your advice for that person?
Listen, I know, Mary, and listen, it seems like I'm confident, but I'm telling you, I got this person on my shoulder who's like, are they really going to hire you? Do you really have the skills? I'm totally like that. I keep saying I'm going to do a TED talk on this because I am certainly the example of the person who I'm always like, I'm not really sure if I'm ready for this role. But I had people around me who are like, are you joking? You would kill it in that role. You have the skill sets. You can do it. And now that I'm in this is the role I'm talking about. Now I'm in this role. I'm like, of course I'm killing it. Of course I can do it. But it really, one, you need people around you who, because everyone has the self-talk, self-doubt talk, like they can't do it, right? So you need people around you who can say, yes, you can do it. Stay-at-home mom, going back in the workforce, you need a support system, which I had. My mother came to live with me, right? Because I was like, Mom, I've been a stay-at-home mom for 11 years. I need you to come and be Keita. And she came and was Keita. But so it was seamless for me going back into the workforce because I had somebody who loved my kids just as much as me and gave me that comfort level to go out there and do what I had to do. It was not easy in the beginning, right? I had to like prove myself. I had to prove myself. I had to prove to my employer that they made a right choice, right? I'd been out in the workforce for 11 years, but I was like, I'm going to give it my all. So you need a support system. And then you just have to like really believe in yourself. Like you can do it, but it does take others telling you getting in and be like, oh, this is easy. And an opportunity. You need an opportunity.
Yeah. And so thank you for that, Keita. Thank you for sharing a little bit of your personal story. That was really wonderful and inspiring. And so I guess I just want to work through a couple more of these questions because I don't want to run up too close to the end of our program. But in terms of creating opportunities, I guess, outside of the legal field, and let's say obtaining one of these opportunities, I'm going to start with you, Andy. What can a new attorney expect in terms of being managed by a non-attorney in a business that doesn't really require legal work? So how might that be different?
Well, it's a different world, especially if you're coming from a law firm type world. You're not going to be probably tracking your time every 6 minutes. You are going to have people who hopefully are drawing you in more because it doesn't cost whatever it does to cost you. You're part of the team. Anytime we have a new manager or you have a new manager, the key just is to sit early on, understand expectations with that manager. What is it they are looking for? It may be that, and by the way, at one point we said a former attorney or reformed attorney. You're never really a former attorney. It slips out every so often. You slip back into a Socratic method or something. I would have the conversation, with the manager. What is expected? What are my goals? Work those out early on. And what are the measurements of those goals? Find a buddy. So a buddy to me is somebody who works maybe for the same manager, maybe adjacent, maybe in the same office. Not only can that buddy help you find the bathroom and, understand when payday is, but they can help you sense the culture. So our culture here, it is not, it's really more consensus, but when we reach a consensus, we move it and we execute. Other cultures there's a hierarchy and the person's in charge, and your job is to get data for that person to make a right decision, making sure that you're understanding the culture of an organization. And a buddy can sometimes help because there are some things you may or may not want to ask your boss, and they can give you some advice on who to go to if you're trying to build your network. And if you're in a place where it's more agile or you're working more remote, taking time to build that network becomes incredibly important. I loved all the points that Keita was making, especially about being confident, even if you have that voice on your shoulder. I also would say you don't need to be embarrassed or ashamed that you've got a law degree. It is a great thing. People do value it. They know that it's not easy to get. Even if you're not using it, you don't have to hide it. And you are going to fall back on some of the stuff we've talked about before. So in an interview, as you're working, it's okay to reference it, use it to describe some of the experiences you've had before, but then also figure out what's actually needed in this new role, starting with what are the results again and how are they going to be measured?
Mhm.
Terrific. Thank you for that. And so this question may be a little bit something that I can speak to, but our law school alumni, our graduates, asking career offices for help finding law adjacent roles. And if so, how are career offices navigating this? Well, this is a really great question. And I will tell you that the answer is yes. Yes, we do have alumni, and not only alumni, but we have students, JD students, who realized during the tenure of their education that they'd rather not practice law. And I think, as Andy said earlier, if it's possible to not do something you really don't want to do, then we want to make sure that we're providing them with alternative opportunities. And so I can speak for myself at Albany Law School. We're navigating this by making connections with industry leaders and letting industry leaders know and hiring talent development offices know about the skill set that a JD develops. And for us too, we have an online graduate program that sort of teaches different disciplines through a legal lens. And so we're making sure that we're including those students as well as we make our connections.
I would definitely recommend building your network and reaching out to your network. I got this job because I reached out to some people I had previously worked for. One of the people I reached out to had interviewed for the legal job I ultimately got. He and the leader of that group just didn't connect well. But he said, hey, you might really connect well, and sent an introduction along, and that's how I got my first interview at Pitney for what ultimately became the Labor and Employee Relations Council role. So finding people who are sitting on, and he knew this, my future boss, because he sat on a bar committee with her. And so there's a lot of those opportunities to talk to people who know other people. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to find the job on your own. You have to keep the job. That one's really on you, but you can, and you have to get it, that's on you. But finding it, there's lots of people who are willing to help you do so.
Andy, I totally agree. Expanding your network, meeting people, you never know where that is going to land. I'm in the same boat. The woman, my old boss, works at FanDuel. And when I saw the opportunity, I reached, and she was like, I've already told them about you. Like, it was like aligned, you know, and it's just meeting people. When I left the legal field at JP Morgan and went into HR, I had been talking to somebody who was an HR business partner about maybe one day I might want to get into diversity, equity, and inclusion. And when this position opened, I just sat down to talk to her. I was like, don't say anything. I'm not really sure if I want to leave the legal world. She immediately called my old boss and was like, this woman, you know, she is, you know, excellent. She can do this job, even though she's in the legal department. It's just networking, meeting people. You never know where that can lead you or help you with your next career option.
And so if you find alumni who are at a company that you're interested with, I mean, that's one of the things people should be searching for. So if you want to come work for me, find out who here went to your school, went to your law school. You know, so Keita and I both went to Penn. I was undergrad. All right, so there's an instant connection between us that most people I have found really want to help. And so do that. It's easy to do now on LinkedIn or through the alumni offices, and find those people who will at least make sure that you understand the company. That helps, understands the culture of the company, and maybe can get you some information about the role you're applying for, or maybe knows who's hiring for that, just to get your resume reviewed. And those are the kind of helps that no one should ever try to avoid using because I got to do it on my own.
Yeah, no. I totally agree. My son was looking for a job. This is totally different. I told him to reach out to people on LinkedIn that went to his college, and people will have an informational just phone call with you. If somebody called me and said, I went to Penn, I'm going to take the call.
You are.
Take the call.
I love that. Permission granted. So one last question here from the Q&A, which is there a benefit to having a joint JD MBA if you were considering pursuing a career that's sort of more focused on business? Is it necessary, I guess, is the way I would probably rephrase it.
Listen, I don't think it hurts,
right?
Like it doesn't hurt. Any graduate degree that you have, I don't think it hurts. I mean, I think you got to figure out like what you really want to do, and is it necessary, just to have a degree, but it's not going to advance your career or what you want to do. I think is not necessary. I don't know what the right answer is for that. I don't think it hurts, but I think that you should really look to what your passion, what you want to do, and is it critical for the journey that you want to go on? Right. I don't know, Andy, you might have to say.
I think it depends on your role. If you're if you want to be CEO, it's pretty good to have an MBA. You want to be CFO, it's good to have an MBA. Even if you don't get an MBA, and we've touched upon this, you've got to have great presentation, storytelling skills. You should understand basic finance, and I think Ex Judicata has ways to help people do that. But you must be able to understand a balance sheet. You need to understand how your company makes money. You don't need an MBA for that, but you should have some basic financial skills. Mm-hmm. I think both of those are critical and are helpful as you're applying for a job, speaking about a job. It shows that you actually understand the results we're all trying to get to, which is how do we make money? Regardless of what roles we're in, my job is to help people retain their employees so they're more productive so we can make money, right? All of that stuff applies. So I think you don't need it. I don't think it hurts. I think it's all part of what your career is. And some people have 20 years of career planned out, and that might be really good for them and what they want to do. You can always go back to school at night, or take time off to go to school if that's really what you want to do, and if it's necessary for how you want to advance your career. And if you're in the right place, your employer might actually pay for that MBA. So yeah, might not be worth you doing it beforehand, and be better off doing it later on when you definitely know what you want to do and what direction your career may be heading in.
Thank you very much for that, Andy. I couldn't agree more that the trajectory of a career is long and windy, and there are many opportunities to pivot. So with that, I will just ask if you have any last comments before we turn to our remarks that have been videoed from Waleed.
Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
I think so. I enjoyed the conversation. I will tell you that.
Well, I've enjoyed this conversation, and I want to thank you both. You've been so gracious and generous with your time. I really appreciate and have learned so much from you both. I'm just going to introduce in this interview, I think is really, really interesting that it aligns sort of perfectly with a lot of what you've both touched upon, because Waleed mentions the expansive skills and competencies that lawyers have. And then when we look at his video, we're really going to see how he connects his deep practice area knowledge with the industry that he works in. And in this case, it's entertainment. So thank you.
I spent 5 years on the legal team, working on a variety of music-related matters, and then I moved over to the business team in 2016. And I made that decision to move over to the business team really because after spending 12 years practicing the law, I kind of felt like I was capped out in terms of the growth and the learning that I was getting. I'd sort of worked on really any different type of music legal arrangement you could think of. I did deals with record labels, music publishers, artists, live streaming festivals, researched legal issues, helped with the expansion of YouTube to countries in Asia, and I really kind of felt like I was maxing out in terms of like what I could really learn to grow as a lawyer. At the same time, I also looked at my seniors, so the head of the music legal department, as well as the general counsel, and I kind of thought I didn't really see myself in those roles as a lawyer. And the things that sort of turned me off on it were there was only so much, I would say, focus and detail and kind of excitement I got out of like really doubling down into the details on some of these legal issues. And so I kind of felt like I was faced with this pivotal moment of, okay, where do I see myself long term? What are the ways that I'm going to grow? And so I sort of surveyed the landscape, and transferring over to the business side was a really logical extension because it allowed me to continue working in this space where I was working with the music business, working with the same music partners that I worked with as a lawyer, but learning different skills. So learning how to build a business, how to focus on profit and loss, how to focus on revenue, becoming more comfortable with financial concepts, things like, the cost of content and run rate and revenue and all these different things that are, really, really important factors in the music business. But I was kind of tangential to that as a lawyer. And so moving over to the business side allowed me, again, to have this opportunity for massive growth and expansion of my professional skill set, but doing it in a familiar place with a familiar subject matter.
Thank you very much. So let's jump into the questions. You have a remarkable transition from law to a leading business development for YouTube's music division. What inspired you to make this switch? I know you just talked a bit about that. And how did your legal background contribute to your success in this role?
Sure. So in the music industry, there actually tends to be a lot of former lawyers that are in business roles. And I think the reason for that is the music business is very heavily IP focused. A lot of the value exchange in the music business is really premised on how copyrights and intellectual property rights are valued and apportioned and exchanged. And so you tend to have a lot of lawyers that understand that space very well, that naturally transition into business roles. And so for me, transitioning into a business role at YouTube, I brought all of that knowledge of IP, intellectual property law, and frankly, how the contracts are structured and valued, and really the balance of trade, I would say, between tech companies and the music industry, how that also all gets apportioned. And so it was a very natural extension. I would say the other things that have really benefited me are critical thinking, sort of anticipating what the partner's needs are. When you spend 12 years negotiating deals as a lawyer, you get a very deep understanding about what the partners care about and what really moves deals. And also you get an understanding of what has gone wrong in deals, right? So anytime there's an issue, a comma was put in the wrong place or a provision was not drafted clearly enough, bringing all that understanding of how to avoid those types of missteps was also really, really valuable on the business side.
Fantastic, thank you. From your perspective, what unique qualities or skills do lawyers bring to the entertainment and tech industries, and how do these benefit YouTube?
So it's a little bit about what I talked about before,
Yes.
right? So an understanding of intellectual property law, an understanding of legal rights and remedies, and sort of bringing all of that understanding. And just to be clear, not all lawyers have those skills, because some lawyers, if, for example, you've been working in litigation, you might have an entirely different skill set. You might be focused more on, sort of civil procedure and, litigation process and things like that. Those don't necessarily translate. However, if you are working in litigation in an intellectual property capacity, then absolutely you have very relevant skills, because again, you're kind of brought in when something has gone south and partners have problems with each other. And that's very, very valuable. That's a very valuable skill set to bring to an entertainment and media company. So I think the other skills that lawyers bring are frankly more generalized critical thinking, understanding from a needs-based perspective, how business is done, right? So like, thinking about things like who has the leverage in the dynamic, right? Like, is it the media company or is it the artist or the entertainer? Being able to think critically and, constructively about those types of things are really, really valuable skills for a media company. The other things that I think are really, really helpful is, and we all go through the Socratic method in law school, where we're forced to think, on our feet, and be creative and try and really get at the core and the crux of what the issues are. That's really, really, I mean, frankly, it's valuable for most different companies, but it's really valuable in the entertainment space, because oftentimes you're dealing with gray scenarios where the answers are not immediately clear, and you might be having to forge a new path. And so having that legal framework of, understanding, the different, sort of power dynamics between companies and entertainers, talent, artists, things like that. All of that is super, super valuable. So I think lawyers bring really, really valuable, skills to the table.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you very much. Next question. YouTube is known for its innovative hiring practices, including hiring lawyers for non-legal roles. How can other companies learn from YouTube's approach to tap into the legal talent pool?
Sure. So at YouTube and at Google generally, there's this ideology that you hire really, really good people, and then you want to find places for them within the company. So there's usually a lot of intra-company mobility. And actually, at my time at Google, I've seen many lawyers go from the legal side to the business side, but I've also seen lawyers go from the legal team to, for example, product management, or product operations. And that's actually, a pretty surprising transition. But I think what it underscores is that, recruiting personnel should really keep an open mind about what types of skills are needed to succeed in these different professions. So for example, in the one case, there was a lawyer that I used to work with who went to become a program manager in one of our rights management products. And so, YouTube has a very elaborate, what we call content ID system that's very, very heavily IP focused. And so It was a natural extension for this lawyer to go from supporting them as a legal counsel to actually going and help architect the product on the product management side. And so I think for HR and recruitment personnel, I would take an expansive view of what skills are required to succeed in certain types of roles, and think are those types of skills that lawyers would bring to the table. So I already talked about critical thinking, needs-based sort of rationalization of like what dynamics are needed, and then obviously thinking about where intellectual property or legal principles are working their way through a job or some type of operation within a company, and looking to see whether or not there might be lawyers that could fill those roles.
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, next question. Do you have advice for applicants on how they should frame their JD degree and legal experience when searching for a non-legal job? I know you've talked a little bit about this already.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the first thing is do your homework and try and understand what the job entails and what is required of it. And then honestly, like go back and look at your legal experience, look at your resume, and try and figure out, I mean, this is kind of basic good hygiene whenever you're applying for a job, is looking at your skills and trying to see like, how do they apply to this job? But particularly for lawyers, go and look at that long list of things that you learned in law school or that you learned while you were studying for the bar and try and figure out how to apply those skills to the job. So for example, if there's anything that requires negotiation, researching, analytical skills, the ability to communicate, ability to figuring out how to be, an advocate for something. All those things are skills that you learn in law school. So figuring out how to apply those in a non-legal context, that should be an exercise you're going through in detail when you're applying for the job, and certainly before you set foot before an interviewer. But before you go into the interview, you should think, okay, what are all the skills that I've got that are going to make this employer's life easier, and become prepared to talk about those. And the good thing is, like, we get such a broad, expansive education as lawyers, so you will have a lot to talk about, but you have to put in the time and look at the role and try and understand what they're asking for. And it may not be expressed in black and white. You may have to do a little bit of digging. For example, if they say, one of your function is expanding the client base, well, that probably means advocacy, or that means some type of sales. And I think as a lawyer, we don't think of it as sales, but when you're going in and trying to make an argument in support of something, that's a form of sales. So think expansively about your legal skill set and how it might apply in a new job.
Yeah, that's tremendous advice. Thank you very much. Okay, leading into our final question. Do you think employers want to know that applicants, quote unquote, do not want to practice law? And if so, how can the applicants make sure they are conveying that in a convincing manner?
So first off, absolutely yes. I think for a non-legal job, I think it's important that you send that message, because the first thing a recruiter is going to do, and I've done this myself, when I get a resume for a non-legal job and they have a JD, I immediately think, okay, why is this person applying for this job? And there's a couple of different things that flow through my head. They may be overqualified for the job because they could be using their legal JD instead. Or I could be thinking, is this just a means to an end? Are they trying to get this job because they want their foot in the door and they're ultimately going to, jump ship for a job on the legal team once one of those jobs opens up? So I think it's really important to set your, intents very clear to the recruiter. I think the ways that you can do that are kind of, there's a multitude of ways you can do that. One common way is to talk about why a legal role is not the role that you're interested in right now. So sometimes I get an applicant who says, look, I tried my hand at a legal job. It's not really for me. I determined that like my path really is going to be in a non-legal role. But here's what I bring to the table. And I already talked earlier about, the different ways that you can parlay your legal skills into a non-legal role. The other thing that you can say is, not never, but not now. For example, like some people may say, I haven't ruled out that I might work as a lawyer in the future, but I know for the foreseeable future, I really want to build my business development skills. I really want to build my financial planning skills, or I really want to build my you name it, fill in the blank, XYZ skills, and why you need, to do that in this role, and why you see a foreseeable runway. Because people that are hiring, unless you're being hired for a temp position that's like by definition contract-based and short-term, people often want to know, like, am I bringing in somebody that has a path? Are they going to be here for the long run? Are they going to stick it out with me? And so I think it's really, really important to get that message out and be really clear. And I think also, like, the flip side of that is ask yourself, like, what are you seeking out of this role? Like, do you really not want to work in a legal role indefinitely? And think about how you would position that as a selling point. How do you position that as something that's going to make a recruiter or a hiring person to say, this is the person I need to join my team?
That's fantastic. Thank you very, very much for your time. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
That was wonderful. And if Waleed were here, we would certainly thank him and know that he'd probably have a few more follow-up questions. With that, I just want to say thank you to Kita, Andy, Kim, and Neil of Ex Judicata. What I love so much about Ex Judicata is that it's a wonderful resource that I can now share with my law students and law graduates. And I often do in our biweekly newsletter so that they have a resource that is precisely for finding jobs that are non-legal for folks who have a JD. Any final words of wisdom?
None for me.
All right. Well, thank you all for
Pushing
joining.
on. Don't worry, it's all going to work out in the end. Everything happens for a reason. So that's all I can say.
I love that, Kita. That's an awesome way to end. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today.
Take care.
Thank you all. Thank you, Mary, Kim.
Bye.